Welcome to Steps to Constructing Research and QI Posters. I'm Beverly Regal, former chair of the ARN Advancing Science and Practice Committee. This is the second webinar of a four-part series developed by the ARN Advancing Science and Practice Committee. Webinar 1 was presented by Terry Peach and provides tips on writing an abstract for poster presentation, which is actually prior to being able to construct one, because that abstract, of course, goes through a peer review process. And once accepted, then you can think about, okay, here are the requirements for developing a poster. Webinars 3 and 4 are presented by Sedalia Vital and Ann Deutsch, and they present tips about displaying your poster either in person or virtually. The learning outcomes for this session are to identify the steps in constructing a research and quality improvement poster for scholarly presentations, to be able to describe the design or layout of posters, and also to be able to facilitate the audience's understanding of the poster content. Let's start with that easy question. What is a poster? A poster is a visual presentation of your research study or quality improvement project. It is really a unique hybrid of an oral presentation and a written paper. And really think about that for a moment. It's a visual presentation of all the work that you've done culminated into one actually display or page, if you think about it, that's on display. Why would you construct a poster? Well, it can convey key information about the work you've done in a format that can be perused in minutes. So attendees take about 3 to 5 minutes. It's an excellent way to tell your story, all of the work that you've done. It's a method to increase networking. So others that are interested in the work that you've done are perhaps doing comparable work in their institution. It also is an opportunity to develop new teams, people who are interested in what you're doing and can maybe even in a different state be a part of your team. Interdisciplinary teams are wonderful, also in an excellent way to increase your knowledge of what's going on in the area, as well as sharing what you've done and what your team has done. It can be less intimidating way of sharing your research study or quality improvement project. So what's a poster session? Now, I know you're all saying, well, I have been to enough of those, I think I know, but let's just think about it for a moment. It's allocated space at assigned times for attendees to see a maze of posters. So here's the issue. How do you get those individuals to actually come and engage with your poster? So again, it's a quick perusal, requires the construction of poster that's going to really attract the audience, given what a poster session is about. The other thing is, do people come to the poster sessions? And that's another important thing to think about. So your abstract is important, as it's usually in the program agenda for the conference and would be helpful to attract individuals to your particular work. There are a couple of studies that have been done related to poster presentations as to what are the factors that seem to attract individuals to a specific poster. So there was one done by Sedlecki in 2017 at a nursing conference, and it was a survey type study, non-experimental. And she found out of, I believe it was 180 attendees, and 93 actually participated in her study, so about a 53%. Response rate, that aesthetics or visual appeal, which would include color, organization, and the layout of the actual poster, was the very first attribute that attracted the attendee. And that makes sense because you're going through this maze, as we said, of posters. So this visual aesthetic attraction first. Second was relevance, and that was usually derived from the title. So the title is really important, cogent, should include your findings, and large enough that people can look at that and know, oh, this is something that will help me professionally or personally. Now, the second study was done at a gastroenterology conference, and 1,800 attended the conference. Less than 5% actually went to the session, the poster session. However, at that less than 5%, they were able to do a very small sample, and it was an experimental study, but very small samples for 3 experiments that were done, and one qualitative section asking for input. And now out of that information was visual appeal, or the aesthetics you can think about, actually attracted was the first attraction. And then in that, the scientific content was the most important piece, and pictures and graphs that had to be not too complicated, but something that you could easily peruse, and then limited use of words in the entire poster. They also, in this study, tried to look at memorability or recall. And because the recall was so poor, they received no significance, so they could not identify any factors that helped increase recall. And basically, people looking at your poster, reading it thoroughly, but then afterwards, can they recall what they actually read and the importance of that? Well, we're going to talk about the steps because it's important for us to think about, out of that maze of all of those other posters, of those people that do attend a poster session, what will attract them to you? So we're going to develop a plan first. And what are the questions to ask for this plan? Well, are you presenting a research or QI poster? That will make a difference. Who is your audience? Is this an interdisciplinary audience? Are they nurses? Are they nurses that are generic in the sense of their specialties? Or do they have specialties? Is it a subspecialty group? What's the audience level of knowledge about your topic? So again, is it a specialty group that would understand most of what you're talking about? Certainly subspecialty. Are most of the nurses basically at what level of education or clinical experience are they? So are they novices in the area, which then would speak to how you might address your poster. What are the poster requirements? Know from the conference what the actual requirements are for the posters. So if it's virtual, the size is not the issue. However, if it's going to be in person and something that's going to be actually placed on a board for display, then the size is going to be important. And certainly submission deadline is going to be important so that you don't miss that deadline and you can actually present your poster after you've gone through all of the process. Step 2 would actually be identifying the actual sections or headings of your poster. So before you write content or think about graphics, what are those section headings going to be? And for research, it's going to be a little bit different than for QI. So let's start with the research headings first. Title is important, and I think I've mentioned that. Certainly, we're going to talk about font size later, but the title was how somebody often decides whether this particular poster is relevant. The visual appeal might be the first thing that attracts them to the poster, but then is it relevant to them? So having a succinct or cogent title, not too long, and actually including in some way what your findings might be would really be important. The authors and their affiliations, think about the authors as your primary investigator and perhaps co-investigators, but typically not all of your key personnel or your entire team, because it's really who's been involved in this poster development. And it might be, if you're the only person, the investigator, primary investigator, let's say it's your dissertation, it may be also your statistician that's worked with you if it's a quantitative study. Introduction and background will be a section that you'll want to have. Methods, results, thinking about graphics at that point. Conclusions, which will include recommendations for future research, and references, and that will only be for cited sources, which typically will be found in your introduction or background. And then acknowledgments. In that, you would include your funding organization, if your study has been funded. If it's your dissertation, your committee, certainly your chair. Same thing for a master's thesis. And if it's a research that was done at an institution, you're a nurse researcher or have conducted research in an institution, that healthcare institution can be acknowledged. So it's similar for quality improvement, but your sections are going to be different. So the title and authors, yes. Your coordinator and co-coordinators of this particular project could be included in the author and affiliations. But then you get into what's the problem and the aim. And the aim, of course, is to be measurable and time specific. You might use the quality improvement model that you use. That's something like the PDSA cycle would be an example. What's the intervention or change that you've actually implemented? What were your results? And then this way, again, as in the research, you can do graphics are very helpful and very enticing visual appeal. Standardization of change. Well, if it was a positive improvement of care, then are you going to standardize that particular intervention or change? So, for example, writing a protocol that would be actually changing the standard of care on your unit or throughout a healthcare system. What are the references? Only to cited sources. And again, that will probably be under your problem area. Acknowledgements would be important if this is funded through an organization or the organization itself. Who is it that actually supported you in doing this particular project? Step 3 gets into writing the content. So tips for writing the content would be cogent or succinct, not long narratives with uninterrupted sentences, just really having what we call the key information. Use terms your audience knows. That's why you have to know who your audience is. Write out your acronyms, even within a nursing organization and a subspecialty. Don't assume that every acronym is understood, even down to ARN, Association of Rehabilitation Nurses, and then put parentheses ARN so that you can use the acronym later. But always write those out initially. Use bulleted lists when appropriate. And it's very helpful because that's a variation. And so as you're looking a lot of verbiage, and you don't want a lot, remember, we want to limit the words. But as you're looking at verbiage, having a bulleted list sometimes helps really highlight those important areas. Then be consistent with fonts. 1 to 2 fonts. I typically use only one font. I'll have different sizes of the font, but the style I typically use Arial. Now, Arial is an example of a sans serif. What does that mean? And we'll talk about that in just a second. And that's to be used for titles and headings. And then serif would be used or could be used for text. An example of that is Times New Roman. So let's talk about sans serif, meaning without serif. If you look at the titles, I want you to focus on the word 3 and actually the letter T. In the title, I'm using Arial. When you come to the text, the word tips is in Times New Roman. The rest of it's in Arial, but the Times New Roman, the word tips uses serif. And compare the T to the T in 3. And you can see that you have little cutesy endings on the T, and you've got a little base for the T. You do not see that. You have a horizontal and vertical for the T in the Arial. So you can kind of see the difference. Also, the P in step in the Arial versus the P in tips, which is Times New Roman. You can see the difference in that. And so that's what we're talking about when you say sans, meaning without serif and with serif. Select the font size based on distance from audience. So think about it, first of all, as 5 feet away, because people are walking down an aisle often. So think about them being at least 5 feet away. And if you are trying to attract them, you've got to have it large enough to bring them into, besides the visual appeal, which is the first attraction, but then looking at the relevance. So 80 to 100 points for the title, 60 to 90 for the names and affiliations, 44 to 80 points for the headings, and then Times New Roman for the text could be 32 to 52. And again, you can use Arial all the way through. There's nothing wrong with that. We've already talked about not writing long narratives with no interruption. That's where the bullet lists come in, and then, or just key phrases. Use graphs and tables, but they can't be complicated. Remember, people are perusing. They're trying to go through a lot of different posters, looking at them. And so they need to be able to grasp the content pretty quickly. Graphs and bar charts, pie charts are also very helpful, and they can be colorful. And that's one of the visual appeals. So thinking about having a lot of different colors is not what we're talking about. In other words, your headings are one color and your titles another color, and the text of each section is another color. That's not what we're talking about. But appeal gets into the color of the background and certainly the color of the print. But one of the ways that you can really attract someone is just having a nice pie chart or bar chart that really has some color to it. The preferred distance for readability is at least 3 feet. Poster layout is how you would organize, and that's the step 4. How do you organize and arrange all of these headings that we've talked about and the content that you've written? So sketch out your diagram first of what your poster will look like. One way you can take it just a sheet of paper and then draw out and sketch out the different headings and what the context might look like, or the sections that you've written might look like. Or you can actually, if you knew that you had a 4x8, for example, poster, take index cards and actually write the headings on them and then lay it out on a table or a floor and really get a sense of what this is going to look like. Always arrange them. If it's a conference that is in English, always arrange from left to right. Creating the banner or the title is really important because it's at the top. Remember, it's the second piece that individuals will look at. Visual appeal first, and then what's the scientific content? And for nurses, the relevance of that, we found in the nursing study, it's got to be relevant personally or professionally to them. So having a long title is not going to be helpful. Keep it short, but have it very professional, not cute. I think cutesy types of titles are not necessarily professional titles. You may think they're attractive, but it does distract somewhat from the professionalism of your study or your quality improvement project. And then if you can include the findings in the study, just exactly what is this that you found, something very positive about your results. If you can just include a word or two about that in your in your title, that would be helpful. Arrange your content in 2 to 4 columns, and I would suggest 3. In fact, the examples I'm going to use for you will be 3, and 3 is really recommended. It's not a concrete thing that you have to have 3, but again, think of the size of your poster. Can it handle 4 columns? If not, 3 seem to work very, very nicely for most. You want to allow enough white space. That means on the periphery of your poster, but also of the content of the poster, that is, and also in between those columns. So you've got column 1 between column 2 and 2 and between column 3. Make sure that white space is symmetrical or even, and the layout then is symmetrical. The color is important. I've mentioned that already. You want to be sure that your color attracts people, but having it overdone is not good either. So having dark print on white or a pastel background is preferable so people can read it easily. Bright colors can be helpful to attract, but be sure that it's not going to be so much that it just is a distractor for attendees. So as I mentioned, think about your graphics having the color. Don't do too much in terms of all of your headings, etc. Try not to use red and green adjacent to one another because this really is a common form of color vision deficiency. So here's an example for a research study poster layout. You can see in the upper left-hand corner is the logo, and that might be your, if you're writing a dissertation, it would be your university or college. Same thing for master's thesis. If this is a healthcare institution, it might be the logo of that healthcare institution. Wherever this research study, whatever you feel is the appropriate logo for your particular study. So being research then, and we've already talked about the authors and affiliations and who those would be. And then under introduction, let's talk about this. We've got 50 to 200 words potentially. And included in that has to be your problem statement, your purpose, or hypotheses need to be included. And if you had a theoretical framework. So you can kind of see you might have a checklist here on some of this. And then under your methods section, you need the design. Was this experimental, non-experimental? What type of experimental design or what type of non-experimental design did you use? What's the sample? What's the sample size? What data collection instruments did you use? And if it's non-experimental, that will be a very important aspect. And then did you use an intervention? If it is an experimental study, what was the intervention and describing that? In the middle column, you can see that I've used graphs, and so it is colorful. It is enticing in a way. It has visual appeal. And whatever that particular graph or pie chart is, we don't want it to be repeated in the narrative in the results. So it should speak for itself, and then you can add verbiage in your results. Again, you could use other graphics or tables. Just don't make them too complicated. The discussion and conclusion section is important because you need to explain very briefly what the meaning of your results is. I think it's also important to add a limitation. I am very skeptical of practice implications. Sometimes you're required to include that, but I want you to think about this. One study does not change practice, so be very cautious how you add anything about practice implications. However, recommendations for future research is always needed with research studies. Acknowledgements, we've talked about that. Certainly, if you've been funded, you need to include that organization. Your references are only cited sources, and we mentioned that's most likely going to be found in your introduction or background. And then for contact information, I suggest you use just your email if you can do that, and you can fit that on. Have a business card with you so that you can exchange the business card with an attendee who's very interested in your work and maybe may have questions later, or really want maybe to begin a relationship, a type of professional relationship with you on this particular topic. Your quality improvement project is pretty much laid out the same way. Logo of the healthcare institution should be included. The title, much like the research title, has to be enticing to them. It should be cogent. It should have what you found, if you can do that. Very just key information. Authors and affiliations, same thing. Coordinator, co-coordinators, it should be limited to them. In your problem, so here we've got the heading of problem and aims. And again, we talked about aims being measurable and time specific. Then you need to have your quality improvement model or approach. So I'm using PDSA. You may have used it. There are others, but Plan, Do, Study, Act is a common one that's used in healthcare institutions. The second column or middle column would be the implementation, the do part of your Plan, Do, Study, Act. So what did you actually do? Did you have an intervention? What change did you make, and how did you go about that? With whom did you go about that? With what patient population perhaps did you conduct this on? And then what are the results? And were the results such that it actually improved, that you found positive results and improved care, so that when you get over to the standardization improvement, are you going to adopt that? Are you going to do further work integrating that, further cycles to integrate it throughout an institution? Are you going to go ahead and adopt it within the unit of care that you are and make it a protocol so it becomes a standard of care? That's what the standardization of improvement is really talking about, or standardization of change. If you look at the graph, again, have a colorful graph. This is a bar chart. It's colorful. It can attract someone to your particular poster. And acknowledgements would be the same as it would be with a research study. Now, what I'm getting to now are poster templates. So we've talked about how you lay it out, how you would do the verbiage, what looks good color-wise, graphics, etc. But how do you actually do it? And so you can use prepared templates. And Adobe InDesign, Adobe Illustrator, Microsoft Publisher, Microsoft PowerPoint are all possible ways of developing your own poster electronically and then being able to send that, if you're going to have it printed, send to someone who can print it for you. So we're going to talk about these templates. The first link I have is to Tufts University. I find it a very good website for you to look at. It has a lot of information in terms of how you do a poster, all of the things we've already talked about, but it actually has the templates that you can click into. However, it's hard for me as I'm presenting this to actually get to these links. I have to stop sharing, which I'm going to do for the second one, the Vanderbilt University, because I can show you very quickly the tips for this, and the use of Microsoft PowerPoint is what they recommend. So let me go into that. So in doing this, I am going to go back to not sharing this PowerPoint for just a moment, and then going into sharing this link. So bear with me for just a moment. So this is Vanderbilt School of Nursing's website for research poster tips. Now, you can probably look at any university library. For example, it's typically the library that develops these research poster tips. And so if you're near a university or you're near a college, go ahead and check with them. And they can be very helpful, and they may actually help you develop the poster using particular templates. Often it is PowerPoint, and they might even be able to facilitate the printing. And some of you, if you're doing dissertations or master's thesis, it may be your own college or department that's able to help you with that. But if you don't have any of that, let's say you're a healthcare institution, you're working through a healthcare institution, if it's very large, they certainly may have that opportunity. Also, some have libraries, some have printing and duplicating services. But if not, then these are other ways, websites that you can go to that can be very helpful to you. So I'm going to go down. You can see that there's lots of information about creating the poster, many things that we've talked about, but there's added information here that can be very helpful that I did not cover today. And then I'm getting to the software tools, and that's why I wanted you to see this. I'm not going to that link, and the reason why is it takes me, I have to stop, share again, and stop sharing, reshare. So, but I wanted you to see the link because you can go into Microsoft Office PowerPoint through this Vanderbilt University website. And when you do, it takes you to a video that shows you how to use PowerPoint. And how do you actually create a poster through the use of PowerPoint? So I think it's really helpful. There are other ways of doing it. These are other links, but this is the one that is recommended for most. For most conferences, this would be the kind of poster. And I'm just going to go all the way down to the bottom because you can see there's a lot of other helpful guides and resources. All of these, you could just check them out and see what you think and how you might choose the right graphs. Again, another website. So it's just a very helpful area. I found this particular website very, very helpful. Okay, I'm going to be stop sharing this for a moment, going back then to the PowerPoint. And now we see that, again, you can do this through this link, or you could go to the Tufts link, or again, to your own university. Now we're going to step 5, which is the printing. Now, if you're doing a virtual, this is not included, obviously, but this is if you're in person and you're not showing in person electronically. I have been to conferences where it's an in-person conference, but I had to do all of my work electronically. And when I arrived at the conference for the poster session, my particular poster was on a monitor. So it was done electronically. But again, it's the same, in terms of the display. It's just that you were not going to go through the printing process and having to carry this to the conference. Okay, so an example, I've given you 2 examples here, one of a commercial business and one of an academic institution. So I want you to think about that. Again, if you're with a university or a college, check that out first and see if the library doesn't have some way of assisting you with the printing. the cost could really be helpful there. And I'm going to show that the difference in that in just a moment. So on this particular slide, I'm going to go out twice because I'm going to go both links. The commercial business, certainly there are a lot of businesses within your area that you could call and see what is the cost of printing your particular poster. Size is going to be a very important cost issue. So will the fabric, if it's laminated, all of these things go into the printing process and cost. But also check, because if you're doing a 4x8, they may not be able to print a 4x8. So you always want to be sure that where you're going to have it printed, that the size is going to be possible. All right, so I'm going to stop sharing again because I want to be able to show you this commercial one real quickly. And I'm really wanting you to see the cost issue. This is what the important piece is here. Okay, so this is called posterpresentations.com. And I'm going to bring you down to price guide. The copyright is still 2022 for this, so it should be relevant prices to you. But if we go down here to the 48x96 or 4x8, you can see for a student, they have a student super saver, which is $115. But you can see the difference in the types of fabrics and paper content, that kind of, or quality content, I should say, for the different types of poster presentations that this particular company can print for you. And so you want to check that out and see what it means to have a professional paper, a dry erase or glare guard, if it's laminated, for example, or an easy travel foldable fabric, as opposed to if it's laminated, rolling it up, or even paper. If it's a good quality paper, you're still rolling it up and having to put it in a tube, so to speak, to carry it. So very, very important questions to ask. Okay, stop sharing on that. That's commercial. Again, you got companies in your area that could probably do that also to check out, but again, check out size. And then this is with an academic institution. So I want to be able to show you this because an academic institution may have different pricing for you. We'll see if we can get there. Okay, so this is my university, University of Cincinnati. I thought I'd pick that. This is actually out of the College of Medicine. The library also at UC has a lot of information on posters and how you might print them and cost, but this actually had the cost listed, and that's why I wanted you to see. Now, this would be for students that go to University of Cincinnati, so that's why I'm encouraging you to check out institutions near you, especially if you are a student at an institution, an academic institution, because you can find that the prices can be very, very helpful. So they do 42x96, 42x72, and again, these are PowerPoints that are being sent or submitted to them, and then here's the current cost for the printing. And you can kind of get an idea of much less than the commercial, but you may not have that choice. And so you want to be able to check these things out thoroughly. Okay, we don't really need to look further at this. I just wanted you to have the opportunity to see what an institution might offer on their website and the cost they might do for their students. And now we'll go back to our slide. So remember, as we've looked at this, we had 5 steps, and you develop a plan, certainly knowing your audience and the level of knowledge of your audience. Be sure you know what your poster guidelines are and when you should submit it. Step 2 is to identify those sections. Make sure that you are identifying all of the headings and laying out the content or context. And then step 3 is to write the content. So for each one of those areas under headings, make sure that you're following some of the suggestions I mentioned, because they are helpful. Again, too much will be a distractor. Too much verbiage, too much color, too much of anything. Moderation is really important in this particular area. And then 4 would be layout of the poster. So making sure you know how many columns you're going to use, making sure you're using your space wisely. And again, back to all of the other factors that we've talked about. And then step 5 is printing if you're not doing it virtually. So I encourage you to watch webinars 3 and 4 because we've talked about how to construct it. You've already looked at the abstract and how you write it. You've been accepted. Now we've done construction. Then how do you display your poster in person or virtually? What are some tips to help you to engage with the attendee once they've been attracted to your poster? How do you really engage them in the work that you've done? Very important. These are the references for this particular presentation. And I encourage you to use them if you can, as to especially some of the websites I've shared with you. And I've enjoyed being with you today. Good luck with preparing your poster.